giving you the insider takes and the big picture view on the Dogs. This is On the Beat, presented by Ingles, with DawgNation insider Mike Griffith and Cody Chapins.
DawgNation, welcome into On the Beat. Happy St. Patrick's Day to all of those who celebrate. I'm Kaylee Mansell, filling in for Cody Chapins. I only hope that I can do half as good as Cody does today. Of course, I'm with Mike Griffith, and Mike, even though it's been a couple of hours, the Dogs are dancing. I think I'm actually more excited in this moment than I was last night. Now that we just had time to react and kind of let it marinate, I could not be happier for this Dogs team that they're going to get a great spot in the bracket. And I'm happy for Georgia fans everywhere who've waited a long time to see this.
Well, it's a chance to make some noise. And, you know, the fact that Georgia's made the NCAA tournament is not lost on Georgia fans, ending the 10-year drought. But you beat Gonzaga, and now you've got the country's attention. Gonzaga with the streak of 9 straight Sweet 16 appearances. I mean, you leave a mark. And it's against a name opponent. You know, Gonzaga with the second longest active streak of NCAA appearances, second only to the green and white, Michigan State. Few number 6 all-time winningest coach. I mean, this is a great opportunity for Georgia. It's a really good matchups. You know, Gonzaga's got some bigs. They lead the nation in points in the paint. But Georgia really good at defending the two. And so if the Dogs can shoot the ball well and defend and not turn it over, you know, those are the 3 keys to this game. I mean, this is a game they can win. I know they're a 7-point dog. And, you know, if you look at Gonzaga's tournament resume, you look at the fact that Gonzaga's a number 8 net ranking and they're a number 8 seed. That one doesn't really add up for me. They're probably better than an 8 seed. And yet and still, I think it's a good matchup for Georgia out there in Wichita.
Yeah, so Dogs and Gonzaga will tip off Thursday at 4:35 on TBS. And before we get into what we're going to talk about, I actually kind of see things a little bit differently. Gonzaga won their conference and are only an 8 seed. So either the committee sees them as maybe somebody that's not nearly as strong, or their conference is just so weak that they might not be able to match up. I think that this is where Georgia playing that really, really tough SEC schedule is going to help them, because they've been through that adversity week after week playing some of the toughest competition. So I think this actually might be more evenly matched than most people are perceiving it to be at first.
Well, I would say, I mean, you know, Georgia doesn't have much street cred at all. You know, a lot of people weren't paying attention when they beat St. John's in November, when they took Marquette down to the wire. You know, the SEC, you just kind of throw them all in a hat. There's 14 great teams in there, and, well, probably more like 8 or 9 great teams, and, you know, 4 or 5 others that, you know, might get a first or second round win. But, you know, it was easy for Georgia to be overshadowed in a historically good SEC. The thing I like about this team is they're confident. You know, I asked Mike about the NIT run last year. It's different. It's not the NCAA. I get it. But still, for them to go into Wake Forest and get a win, and go into Ohio State in front of a packed house and get a win, you know, that's postseason winner go home mentality that they'd never been through. And so I think that helps them out. Kaylee, you know the stat on Mike White. I mean, he's 4-0 in first-round NCAA tournament games, of course, all at Florida. And then what he did as a player. I know that's something, you know, we're going to talk about a little later, but you know, Mike White's been here before. Mike White has beaten Mark Few before. Granted, it was 2017 and he was at Florida, but still, this is not a coach that he's unfamiliar with. And Mark Few had a lot of nice things to say about Mike White as well in today's DawgNation.com story. So I like the way it sets up 2 good guy coaches, you know, Mike and Mark Few. You can turn on the live mics and still sustain a rated G audience, I think.
So yesterday you got the chance to be there with the team. You got to watch them react. You also got to be a part of the press conference that occurred right after yesterday. Well, I went back this morning and I'm listening to it, and I'm starting to hear some words that I'm like, I think I've seen this film before. I've heard some of the same verbiage, and it starts with Blue Cane. They asked him, you know, what does the practice look like beforehand? What do you guys need to do? This was Blue Cane's response.
Yeah, just get back to our hunger. The SEC tournament didn't necessarily go how we wanted it to. But yeah, Coach White just, whenever he came back, just really wanted us to get back to our identity and just being hungry again. So we had a good practice yesterday and just competing.
Identity and being hungry. We're going to circle back around to another guy who spoke on that last year. But at least for me, and you and I have kind of spoke on this, is I do believe that they're hungry going into this tournament. I don't think that they had to be super hungry going into the SEC tournament because they already reached their goal. What they worked for all season long, they knew it was going to happen. And with what we saw go down with Cooper Flagg getting injured, like maybe it was a good thing that Georgia didn't have to play a lot of tough games in a really short stretch because they need to be at their healthiest at this point in time. So I do believe there's going to be a different hunger going into the tournament. But to hear that Mike White is using those words, it sounds like he might be taking a page out of somebody else's book.
Yeah, and like Kirby Smart, who obviously this is a big part of the Georgia culture. Kaylee, I almost feel like it's across the athletic department. I think this is the effect that Kirby's had on all the athletics at Georgia. I mean, every Georgia program now goes out there with a chip on their shoulder and with something to prove. And you talk about hunger and trying to make your mark. And I don't know that Mike necessarily copied Kirby, but Mike was a baller too. I mean, Mike was a 4-year starter at Ole Miss at point guard, and he took the Rebels to 3 NCAA tournaments and helped deliver their first ever NCAA tournament win. It was Mike White dribbling out the clock and a win over Villanova, a basketball superpower. So, I think maybe sometimes people might get fooled a little bit by Mike and his his Boy Scout looks and mannerisms. I mean, there's a competitor under there. There's a reason why he's had the success at Louisiana Tech and Florida and now Georgia at sustaining success and raising the bar with programs and doing it the right way with character kids. So a lot of great things to be said about Mike, but circling back to your point, the guy's a competitor. I feel like he's really embracing this matchup. He had a pretty big smile on his face when the bracket came out. You knew it was going to be somebody tough. Might as well be the Zags and a future Hall of Famer coach in Mark Few.
Another word this past Georgia football season that was really instilled into our head week after week was this idea of resilience for team. Yeah. Well, that was another word I got to hear yesterday in the press conference. So here's Mike White on his team being resilient.
When it's the big stage, when it's the NCAA tournament, when it's that great opportunity, especially for our guys outside of RJ Gottfried, it's going to be new for all of our guys. It's how do you respond to that first adversity and that seventh adversity, because it's coming, right, throughout the game. And we know we'll be playing a really good team. And but these guys throughout this season have gotten better and better throughout the year in terms of how they handle, some of those adversities. Incredibly resilient team here. And we're going to be a tough out. And I think the committee recognized that.
Again, that sounds so familiar to me, and I'm looking back through everything, and I'm like, you know what? This is why. Here's Kirby Smart after Georgia beats Texas at Texas.
And these guys are so resilient. You know what I mean? We talked about intent. What was our intent when we walked on the field? Our intent was not to take pictures, not to do all the superstar stuff. Our intent was to eat. Our intent was to come eat and be hungry.
So ultimately the message is the same. One just happens to be way louder than the other. And even though the record books don't necessarily show it in terms of dominance, there's so many similarities between these teams. Georgia obviously coming from a different perspective of them already being at the top and then being doubted. Well, Georgia, before the season started, had no business being a real tournament contender. And now they kind of go from the position of being at the bottom and having a chance. And so, just that tough SEC schedule every single week, but how much it ultimately prepares you for that. So even though the records don't show it, there is a lot of similarities with these teams and what they've had to overcome from the doubters.
Well, obviously, historically good seasons in football and basketball. Now, football didn't produce a national champion, so a lot of people might get amnesia and forget just how deep this conference was and how challenging the football schedule was with those road trips to Texas and Ole Miss and Alabama and having to come back from that Bama loss and having to rebound from a decisive loss at Ole Miss. And you think about basketball and losing 9 of 11 games and 2 4-game losing streaks. And, of those 9 losses, 6 of them came on the road to top 10 teams, right? There were 6 Ole Miss losses in there, right, for like football. So, I think resiliency is a big word for any championship program and any great athlete. You're going to get knocked down. You're going to have to come back. And in basketball particularly, it's more of a game of runs, I'd say, even than football. And, the other team's going to make runs. You're going to miss shots. And what do you do when you miss shots? Does it affect you on defense? Do you have a lapse? Do you turn the ball over? Are you able to stay dialed in? It's a little bit more fluid than football, but it's the same concept, Kaylee. I think you're drawing a really common bond. And, the other bond is that Kirby and Mike were both players right around the same era, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Late 90s. And, Ole Miss and Georgia football weren't exactly at the top of the heat. Ole Miss was, doing some unprecedented things there with Mike White at point guard, whereas Kirby was, trying to help Jim Donnan get this program back where it needed to be, set the table up for Mark Richt to compete for some championships and win some SEC titles. So I think the fact that both of these guys were players, and I look at their age, you look at guys in their late 40s. I mean, to me, this is kind of when the coaches, they got 10 years of experience or more, and they start to really come into their own now. They've got a real command of their sport. I think they're both leaders in their respective sports. Certainly Kirby a lot more pronounced with the national titles. But, to your point, you look at what Georgia basketball did this year, and, you ask yourself, I mean, and Kirby did a great job, no doubt, but so did Mike White. But who really, if you had to pick one, what's more impressive, Georgia football winning the SEC or Georgia basketball making the NCAA tournament for the first time in 10 years relative to the talent they had to work with? And it's a pretty tough call. I think both these coaches did a really outstanding job.
Well, I think it goes back to what you said about the competitor inside of them. And even going back and looking at their collegiate histories, you take a look at Mike White, 370 assists, which is top 10 in Ole Miss history, 2 SEC Western Division titles, 3 consecutive NCAA tournament appearances, and the first win for Ole Miss in the tournament ever came at the hands of Mike White, a 4-year starter. And then, of course, Kirby Smart, 4-year Letterman, first team All-SEC selection. They've got the competitiveness and the winner's blood in them. And, I mean, can we think of any 2 other coaches that lead in football and basketball for their school that have the same level of SEC experience at the same time as Mike White and Kirby Smart?
Yeah, I can't. Both team captains as well, and, academic standouts. And obviously you see them now in these CEO/coach roles. They're really built for this, and that's where you really got to applaud Josh Brooks for identifying Mike White. When he made that hire, a lot of people were skeptical, and it was going to be a big lift for somebody. Could Mike White do it? And here we are on the brink of, Georgia with, perhaps a program-changing win, their first NCAA tournament win since 2002, or if you want to get one that counts that wasn't vacated, Kaylee, I think you got to go back to 1996.
That's true.
But to your question, I can't think of another football basketball coach combination where the coaches competed in the same conference they're at right now. Obviously Kirby a Bulldog and Mike at Ole Miss, but still there's something about that I think translates to the players. Knowing that coach has been here before in my shoes, I think it makes the message that much more digestible, and I think it makes the coaches that much more relatable to the players.
Yeah, and even though these 2 have had very different circumstances coming into this past year with the cards that they were dealt, the message and the overall tone and the way that they go about things is very similar. Now, I would say Kirby Smart in general is a lot louder than Mike White, but you can tell at their core they're very competitive in my mind, in the same a lot of ways. And so there was, you've got all these SEC schools now who are suddenly basketball schools, and now the University of Georgia, hey, they got football and they got basketball. So it's a good look for everyone. Here in just a moment, we're going to continue on the basketball talk, but from a wide perspective. I'm excited to get into it. But first, this is On the Beat, presented by Ingles.
It's the moment you dream of, the moment you work for, train for, run wind sprints when nobody's watching for, the moment when hours of gym time, court time, prep time, all culminate into this time. The moment when millions of bounces, blocks, and boards all add up to this, your moment. Ingles, we're with you every step of the way.
So, of course, Georgia making the tournament is a huge accomplishment, but perhaps something that we're going to be talking about for a really long time because it might be the ultimate level of achievement is the SEC, who had 14 teams make it. A new record, and we're going to talk about it with Mike's 10,000-foot view. All right, Mike. 14 teams total. The next most is the Big Ten with 8. You've got Auburn, Florida, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, Texas A&M, Ole Miss, Missouri, Mississippi State, Oklahoma, Georgia, Vanderbilt, Arkansas, and Texas. The only 2 teams who didn't make it were South Carolina and LSU. Can this, realistically, can this ever be done again, or is this the new blueprint? Is the SEC now the premier basketball conference? It's honestly so mind-blowing to think about.
Well, right now, certainly this year, the previous record for the most number of teams in a tournament from a conference was 11. That was set by the Big East in 2011. I don't think it's a coincidence that, the SEC, Mike Slive and Greg Sankey, when they made this a priority, hired Mike Tranghese, a former Big East commissioner, to say, hey, how do we get it done? And certainly the blueprint is there. You see the SEC putting the money into it with the facilities and the coaching hires. I don't know about the sustainability about 14 teams from one conference. It certainly is fascinating. Normally maybe, you might have some people crowing, well, the SEC got too many teams in there. I heard Coach K on his podcast talking about teams with a sub 500 record getting in the tournament in their respective conference. And yet still if not for the controversy surrounding North Carolina getting in, a lot of people might be poking holes in the SEC right now. I guess the proof is going to be in the pudding. We'll see how the SEC does in the tournament. I think that people are going to be watching that closely to say, hey, is this an ESPN thing? Because now, the ESPN's got the basketball contract and, yada, yada with their conspiracy theories. It's going to be up to the SEC to uphold that number. And how many teams can get to the second round or to the Sweet 16 or to the Elite or to the Final Four? Does an SEC team win it? You look at the best team in the country, the number 1 overall seed. We saw Georgia take the Auburn Tigers to the buzzer and Stegman and lost by a field goal. We saw them go down to the jungle and give them all they wanted after a week off, after Mike had dropped in a nice 1-3-1 zone to the package with these young players. And you kind of mentioned the extra time and what might he have in store for Gonzaga. But I do think that the SEC has made its mark. This is certainly something for SEC fans to celebrate, appreciate, and makes filling out the brackets a lot more fun.
Yes, it does. And it has already brought so much drama. This is kind of off topic, but just because I saw this right before we started filming, it's already brought so much drama over the last 24 hours. And not just because of the North Carolina stuff, but now the West Virginia governor is threatening to sue the selection committee because West Virginia didn't make it. That's how much people care about March Madness, and I'm glad that now the SEC is understanding that, hey, we've got to be a part of this too. We don't want to dominate just one aspect. We want to dominate all sports. But I'm sitting here looking at everything, and you talk about the Sweet 16. There's so many SEC teams that at this point the numbers favor that an SEC team is going to win it. But when you've got 14 teams and you're looking at how many SEC teams can make the Sweet 16, for me, I think the floor is 4, the ceiling is 7. On my brackets, I've got Auburn, Texas A&M, Florida, Alabama, Tennessee, and then maybe Kentucky. Kentucky's been a little bit banged up over these last couple of weeks, and it's hard to get yourself back in the groove when you didn't get the chance to have that chemistry and compatibility that you've been working for all season. So right now, I'm going to take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Give me 6 SEC teams making the Sweet 16. And that's
Wow.
with the brackets lining up the perfect way. Because, I think all the ones that are really high seeds, Auburn, Florida, Alabama, Tennessee, Texas A&M, I've got all of them going in.
Yeah, I could see that. Auburn's lost 3 out of 4. Just for all the Georgia fans that were mad at Georgia for losing games, hey, that's the number 1 team in the country that lost 3 out of 4 games in the SEC. So that speaks to the elasticity that we talked about on our Sunday night special. Kaylee, I thought you did a great job with that. We really enjoyed visiting with you from Stegman Coliseum, and fans can certainly see that on our YouTube page as well. When myself and Jack Leo kind of went a little more in depth on this, but yeah, Auburn runs into a pretty hot Michigan team. I'd like to think that Bruce Pearl could pull that out. We'll see if A&M knocks off Michigan. Of course, A&M's got to win over Auburn, but I do think with Auburn and A&M over there, I think you've got a Sweet 16 over there. You look at the next bracket down. I'm not convinced that Ole Miss can get through that, so that takes care of them. Florida for sure. If not Florida, I really like the way Oklahoma's playing. I hate those 2 teams are going to have to meet in the second round. But yeah, there's 2 right there. You go down another bracket. You see, Missouri basketball is playing pretty good right now. Could they make it? I think that's kind of maybe more of a 50-50 jump over. And of course, Alabama's in the same bracket with Duke. I actually like Alabama to beat Duke with you mentioned the Cooper Flag injury. So that's 3. Drop down another bracket. No, I'm unfortunately, I do think Georgia will beat Gonzaga, but I'm with you. I think Houston is way too tough. So I'm going to go with a minimum of 5, and my ceiling is going to be 7.
Yeah,
SEC.
That's where I got mine set. The floor is 4. The ceiling is 7. Now, Auburn's the tricky one here because you're right. They have lost last 3 of 4, but I didn't forget that this is the same team that before the season started had to turn the plane around because they were fighting. Obviously, there are some issues within that group. They were on the way that Houston had to turn the plane around. Look, that's a team that screams me, 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 and not team, team, team. And so I think they've got enough juice to get out of those first 2 rounds into the Sweet 16. But in that part of the bracket, my Final Four pick is your alma mater, Michigan State.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. I can tell you, and I've covered both of those programs, and they're both battle tested. I can tell you, Bruce's teams live out loud, and so Bruce lets these guys be themselves, and that whatever that situation was probably going to happen sooner than later. And Bruce probably, I'm not saying that he encouraged it, but things play out on his teams. I mean, they're incredibly tight. I mean, the thing that's the mark of the Bruce Pro teams. They're incredibly tight. They're very close to one another. They spend a lot of time together. I don't think that's as much as a problem is I thought John Broome he looked worn down against Tennessee and missing key free throws down the stretch. That's not what you want to see from a veteran. It makes you wonder if there's some distractions. You wonder if maybe, he's thinking about his NBA draft stock or his career, or what is his agent telling him. They've got a young freshman in Pettiford that, was on fire when they played Georgia. It feels like he hasn't been playing as well lately. They're still doing great things. Their side court and under basket defense is still remarkable. They can still score in bunches. They've still got some older, experienced guys. But I'm kind of with you. Even though Auburn is the number 1 overall seed, losing 3 out of 4, and it's interesting. When they lost the first game in that stretch, I actually texted with Bruce and I said, this isn't the worst thing in the world for this winning streak to come to an end. You really don't want to be peaking with a 12 or a 15 or a 20 game winning streak going into the tournament. You want that taste in your mouth. You want that reminder that you've got to get dialed in. But the Tennessee game to me was very on Bruce-like, the way that team finished. So they're going to need some magic. They got a chance to get some momentum, but they're going to run into a really good Michigan team. They better get it going fast. Michigan's playing really good ball right now, winning the Big Ten tournament. Yet and still, I look at this Izzo team, and typically his best teams are the teams where maybe the expectations, aren't out of the gym. They're blue collar. They play his style. They're physical. They're battle tested. No, they didn't go to the Big Ten championship game in the tournament, but as you pointed out, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of with you on that one. I would lean a little bit towards Michigan State in that bracket. But either one of those two teams, if they get there, they're capable. If Auburn gets the ship righted, we've seen what a force they can be.
Yeah, you do. Last thing on this, you do bring up something that I recognized on Saturday because I'm watching the game in Nashville. Auburn goes 13 of 22 from the free throw line. And in March Madness, a lot of these games are just typically closer because they're opponents that you haven't faced before. You only have such a small amount of time to prepare for them. So free throws are super crucial at this point in the season. They go 13 of 22, while Tennessee goes 25 of 27. If Auburn makes those free throws, they win that game. So got to get that part together. But last thing on this before we move on to some football rankings, I'm going to go ahead and lock in my Final Four. It's going to look like this in my bracket too. It's going to be Florida, Michigan State, give me Duke, and Tennessee. And I think that Florida is a good team to put your money on right now. And not just because they won the SEC tournament, but this is just a team that's clicking at the right time and embarrass some teams in the tournament that probably shouldn't have been beaten that way. So I think Florida is a good team to put your pick on right now, as much as I hate to say that. And it's a good thing Eddie's got a blindfold on over his ear so he can't hear me say that. But I think out of all the SEC teams and what I've seen this far, I think Florida's a good team to put your hypothetical money on if that's what you're into. Mike?
Yeah, they're hot right now. I'm always hesitant to go with the hottest team going in because they're the hottest team going in, and it feels like somebody else, kind of heats up once they get in there. I like Alabama to make the Final Four. They can really score the ball. They've got experience. I think Nate Oates is a great coach. So I'm going to take the Tide out of that region. I do like Houston. I like the way they defend. I think they're a physical team. Rick Barnes, I just don't know if he can get that monkey off his back and reach a Final Four. I'm not convinced. I love their point guard Ziegler, but to me, they rely too much, on Ziegler, and your point guard can only do so much. So I'm going to go with Houston in that bracket. The other bracket, Florida is obviously the conventional pick in their bracket. It's hard to go against them. I like them in that bracket. I don't think that's a particularly tough bracket, so I'll throw Florida in there. So we got Florida, Alabama, Houston, and as we noted earlier, Michigan State over Auburn, just by a hair. It could be either one of those teams, but I'd go with one of those two. And I know that's boring. I know when people fill these brackets out, they want to pick a Cinderella, and I always tell them, do at least 3 brackets, right? Pick the bracket of the teams you want to see win, so you can enjoy that. Pick the bracket of chalk. You want to try to win a little bit of money, and then just kind of have a wild card bracket, right? Throw your Cinderellas out there. You're 1 in a million ESPN bracket winner. So I say go ahead and make out 3 brackets. I know some contests only allow you to have 2. But my first bracket is always my chalk bracket, and I usually don't have lower than a 2 seed, occasional 3 seed, but I think this is going to be one of those years, where it's going to be a lot. You're going to see chalk. I just feel like the cream rises to the top, and with all these great SEC teams, I think that you could see 2 of them in the Final Four.
I think your good friend Peter Burns said something similar. Correct answer is 3 brackets, one that you fill out in less than 60 seconds, one in which you spend time studying matchups, and one that you actually want to see happen. So thought you hit the nail on the head with that one right there. Well, since we're talking about rankings, in just a second, we're going to transition to some football rankings. That was a hot topic of conversation last year with our good friend Mike Griffith. But first, I want to give a shout-out to the Finnish Long Drink. You best believe that while I was in Nashville watching basketball games this weekend, I indeed had a Finnish long drink or 2. There's one for everybody, no matter what you're into. It's a pre-made gin cocktail. You can go with the classic blue, the traditional one. If you need something on the healthier side, that 0 sugar white can. Or if you're more into the flavored stuff, you've got the peach and the cranberry. Or, if it's one of those days like Thursday or Friday, it's the first round, you're just really excited and you need something to keep you going, go for that black can that's a little bit stronger. So now is the time to try the Finnish Long Drink, and to find out where you can get one closest to you, you can visit thelongdrink.com, put your city or your zip code in, and it'll tell you where you can go pick them up. So now is a good time to do that with March Madness happening this week. So go check out thelongdrink.com. That's thelongdrink.com. So last year, I remember when we were discussing this new tiers of college football. Now there's 16 teams, kind of divides it up perfectly. You've got the top 4, the upper middle, which is another 4, the lower middle, which is another 4, and then you've got the bottom tier. And I remember Mike saying that Alabama was a second tier program. And a lot of people were quick to come after you. But you know what, Mike? You get your flowers because you ended up being right about that. And since we've got March Madness and all these numbers and all these rankings, I thought that we would go through today and re-rank where SEC teams stand now in 2025 with their ranking. So we'll start with the bottom tier. I'll go first. I'll give you my 4 and let you marinate on yours. So, obviously, you've got Mississippi State, Jeff Lebby going into his second year. Now they do get some transfers, but still no SEC wins. So, that's your clear number 16. You look at a team like Kentucky, they're headed in the wrong direction. You do bring in Zach Calzada, who was once at Texas A&M as your quarterback, but a lot of problems to fix on the defense too. So it's not one singular thing you can point to. It's a lot of different things. Then you've got Arkansas for me, just 7 returning starters for Arkansas. Now one of them will be their quarterback in Taylor Green. Listen, St. Pittman's my guy, but still in that bottom tier category. But I do think that the offensive system improves with Bobby Petrino coming back for a second year. And then for my last one, I've got Vandy. just because I know that they're going to bring back Diego Pavia. He had a tremendous season, but I don't think that I can put them ahead of some of the other schools right now, especially just because we don't know if that's super sustainable. So for my bottom tier, I'm going Mississippi State, Arkansas, Kentucky, and Vanderbilt.
I mean, I hate to be boring, but that's my 4 too. I just, yeah, it really is. I think teams are going to be ready for Vanderbilt this year. I think they kind of snuck up on some teams, but you beat Alabama, you played Texas within a field goal. Pavia is fantastic. He took a lot of hits. He took a lot of violence. Does he get through another season healthy playing that way? Probably not. Mississippi State was very good. I mean, they played Georgia within 10 between the hedges. They played, Big 12 champ Arizona within a touchdown out there in Sun Devil Stadium. But it's still Mississippi State. It's a lot of heavy lifting. It's only year 2 of Jeff Lebby. Kentucky, the end is near for Mark Stoops. I just don't see it. I mean, Vandegrift gave him a nice win over Ole Miss, but even with 2 great Georgia football players, it wasn't enough to change it gave the Dogs a good scare too, by the way. But I just don't feel like that culture is headed in the right direction. And so I'm with you. And as much as it pains me to say that about Sam Pittman, I love Sam, but I just don't think they have the players. And when you look at the next tier up, you'll understand why. You put them in put them in the Big 12. Maybe they're playing in the Big 12 championship game, but the SEC is so good and so balanced. It's a real struggle when we get up to tier 3 here. It's probably not going to be much separating the teams in tier 2 and tier 3 for us, Kayla. I do anticipate we may have some differences here, though.
All right, go ahead and give me your tier 3 then. We'll let you go next.
Well, I'm not bought into A&M. This was a program that I thought could be on the rise, and to me, it was there for the taking, and they just didn't get it done. I'm not convinced the quarterback is going to be consistent enough. I know there's some talent, but this coach didn't have the impact that I thought he would. Missouri's got a fantastic schedule, but they lose their quarterback, and I thought Brady Cook was really good. This one might surprise you a little bit. I see Ole Miss kind of faltering. I think Jackson Dart was awful special. They lost a lot of that talent in the front 7. I think Ole Miss had their window to make the playoff. That loss at Florida was really damaging to Lane Kiffin. I see them slipping down a tier. And for all the talk about Hugh Freeze, and who knows, maybe they've got enough in the tank to take Georgia down to the wire again. They played the Dogs awful tough, especially the last time they're on the Plains. But this one might be the one where I eat my words, but I'm going to put Auburn in that 3rd tier as well.
Don't even worry about eating your words. I've got Auburn in that 3rd tier as well.
Okay, I feel better.
New quarterback to work with, and although Jackson Arnold does have some of that experience, their success is going to be really dependent on one another. He might not be in the hot seat now, but after this year that he's been telling them, hey, we're just waiting on this one, we're bringing in the recruiting class, we're bringing in the transfers, it's going to be a lot warmer in that seat if they don't see that same level of success this year. So I've also got Auburn. I put Texas A&M in that category as well. I haven't seen enough from Marcel Reed, and it's kind of like they're in that little brother position with Texas right now. I just don't think that they're going to be able to compete at the moment. And two, it's so tough just being in the state of Texas if you're not the University of Texas, because there's so many other schools to compete against for the top recruits in that state. So Elko's really going to have to go all in on building his recruiting classes in a better way. I've got Missouri in there as well. I was really bought into Missouri last season, and I ended up eating my words. So we're going to start them at the bottom this year, and then where we differ is I have Oklahoma in my 3rd tier over Ole Miss. John Mateer steps into the quarterback role, but I'm not exactly sure about how much talent they have protecting him. So I think we'll know a lot more about this Oklahoma team headed into year 2. It was really tough for me. I think Texas A&M and Ole Miss are kind of interchangeable in that 2nd and 3rd, but what Lane's been able to do so well is address their needs in the transfer portal. And last year, if you'll remember, when Jackson Dart comes out and the one possession goes to Austin Simmons, I mean, he looked like he had been the starter for Ole Miss all year long. So I have a lot more confidence in him. I know that they lose so much, but that's what Lane does so well, is getting those good transfer portal players. So I'm not ready to count them out just yet, but I do believe that between them, Auburn, and Texas A&M, they could all be interchangeable as the season goes on. And then still think Alabama's a 2nd-tier team. They don't really have a quarterback yet. We don't know anything about what's going on behind the scenes. So until I know that Alabama's got a quarterback set in stone, even though Jalen Milroe wasn't great, at least he was consistent and they knew what they were getting out of him. And then I'm going to go South Carolina. bringing back Lenora Sellers, who might end up being a big Heisman contender by the end of the season. I didn't give them enough credit last year for all the offseason moves that they made. Shane Beamer's got something really special going on in South Carolina. I don't know if they're going to be a playoff contender, but they might get pretty close again like they did last year. And then I've got Florida. They're onto something with DJ Lagway. I think that they've got it's not a franchise, but a franchise-type guy in DJ Lagway. Billy Napier completely surprised all of us last year. I didn't even think that he was going to be the head coach of Florida by the time that Georgia and Florida played each other. But we were all wrong about how much that they could actually do. And now that he knows who his quarterback is and what he's got to do to build around him, I'm putting Florida in that second tier.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I mean, very similar. I have Oklahoma in the second tier instead of the third. I have confidence in Brent Venables. That was one of the youngest teams in the country last year. They bring back a lot of guys. They got a lot of experience. We saw our good friend, from the Senior Bowl, Jim Nagy, take over now as a director of personnel. I think that's going to make a difference. I think Jim is a great football mind. He was obviously up for some GM jobs in the NFL, most notably the New York Jets. So I think Oklahoma's had about enough of losing. I think they've got the right coach. I think this is a must-win year for Venables. So I went ahead and put Oklahoma in that second tier. I'm like you with Shane Beamer. I doubted him last year. I guess we shouldn't have. Lenore Sellers was our, freshman offensive player of the year, with the Football Writers Association of America awards. Ryan Grubb at Alabama, I do think, that's going to help Kalen DeBoer out a lot. But that unsettled quarterback situation, questions about the culture. It's year 2 now. Does it get better? Does it get worse? You're 1 year further away from Nick Saban, although he still has a stadium over there. I wonder if he's going to, keep talking smack about helping the team whenever they need him, because I don't remember him helping them out much last year or being involved. It certainly sounded good at the press conference, but it didn't happen. And I've got Tennessee there. I think Josh Heupel does a great job. I think Nico's a dangerous quarterback. It's a really scary SEC opener for Georgia to play in Neyland Stadium. Not necessarily because I look at the matchup, outside of Nico at quarterback, but on the road in the SEC for some Georgia quarterback. I presume Gunnar Stockton at the moment. I guess time will tell. So that's my second tier. I guess we'll save the last tier for now, right? So you go first.
All right. Well, Dogs still the standard, reigning SEC champion. Didn't go as far into the playoffs as a lot of people would imagine, but just a series of unfortunate events. And even though they're going to be starting with a different group this year, as long as you've got Kirby Smart, I'm confident every year on what the Dogs can bring to the table. So, and then you've got Texas. They lose a lot of pieces, but again, with their schedule again this year, it's going to be really, really easy for them. Arch Manning, is he going to be the greatest quarterback in the history of Texas? Maybe not, but he's sat behind Quinn Ewers for 2 years. He's learned a lot. He's got a great setup of a schedule. So, you got to keep Texas in that top tier category. And I like Sark as a coach. LSU, I hope that this is one that we don't end up eating our words, because I feel like each and every year we kind of put LSU on this sort of pedestal, and then they're always kind of one step down from where they've been. But they bring back Garrett Nussmeier, who could have left. He comes back. We saw really great glimpses of the best of him, but we also saw some of the lowest moments from him last year. So can he compete at the highest level each and every week? That's what we're going to find out. However, finally, Brian Kelly addresses their transfer portal needs, and LSU brings in the #1 transfer portal class in all of college football. So clearly, they're tired of sitting on the sidelines watching these other SEC teams play in the playoffs, and they're going to do what needs to get done. So maybe this is the year that LSU finally addresses those needs, especially on the defense, because basically wiped the slate clean with coaching staff. So, and then I'm going to go Tennessee too. Made a playoff run. Bring back a quarterback who's got a ton of experience. Yes, you have to replace some people, but just based on there was enough turnover for me to feel like they're going down a notch.
Fair enough. As far as Arch Manning, boy, really unpopular opinion here, but wouldn't you rather have him than Gunnar Stockton as your starting quarterback at this point? The guy's got a ceiling. He can run. He can throw. Georgia was in that one. They were in it to the end. That recruitment, boy, you just shake your head and say, man, what if the Dogs had gotten Arch Manning? Who knows, right? And maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe Gunnar Stockton will outperform Arch Manning. It's interesting that Gunnar Stockton was the quarterback who came off the bench to lead his team to an SEC championship, not Arch Manning. Texas stuck with Quinn Ewers, and at some point you got to wonder, man, shouldn't they have given Arch a shot? We saw that at the end of the first half in Austin. Arch actually, I think, moved the ball a couple first downs before I think the Georgia defense caught up to him and forced a fumble. But hard not to like Texas as the favorite going into next year, if we're being completely objective. And we know Georgia's got some questions to answer, but we know they've got Kirby Smart. And nobody's been better at answering questions and reloading than Kirby Smart. All you got to do is look at the 14 guys at the Combine this year, tied a program record, 3 projected first-round picks. I mean, Jalen Walker wasn't even a starter 2 years ago, and now he's a top 10 pick. So Georgia got it done last year despite all the injuries and suspensions. This team seems to have a better chemistry. We know Kirby's addressed that in the spring. You got to like where the defense is going right now. That defensive line looks like it's been firmed up with Christian Miller coming back. KJ Bolden is just an absolute superstar in the secondary. It's so exciting to watch him play. I think he brings so much energy. In the linebacking core, with CJ and Raylan back, I mean, these guys are third-year starters now. They're veterans. The offensive line we wonder a little bit about, but Kaylee, there's so many big bodies and so much talent there. You say, man, you got to be able to chisel something out of all that talent on your old line. And of course, you feel good about Nate Frazier as a tailback. You hope somebody else emerges to take a little bit off of him. You want to think these transfer receivers will work out better than the last two. And, oh, by the way, Colby Young's back, and don't underestimate that. Tight ends room should improve drastically for all the hype. They really underperformed last year. If you look at the grading, it wasn't what we thought it would be. And it just circles back to quarterback. Can Gunnar hold the job? Will Puglisi emerge? He's the passer. Could the quarterback of the future be somewhere waiting to come in the portal in April? That's the big question for Georgia. But however they answer it, I feel very confident Georgia will be in the top 4 in the league and, could make another SEC championship game appearance, ultimately make the playoff. I'm with you on LSU. I'm a big, fan of Brian Kelly. This guy's phenomenal. What he did at Grand Valley State, what he did at Notre Dame, getting LSU to the SEC championship game, producing a Heisman Trophy winner. Brian Kelly didn't forget how to coach. Now, there is a lot of turnover, and so there's a lot of questions. But LSU, to me, looks like the team that's most likely to challenge Texas for the SEC championship at this point. And then I'm really high on the Gators. You said it, and you kind of backed off it. I wish you wouldn't have. I think DJ Lackway is a franchise player. I know from being down there in that Florida culture every year with the Spurrier Awards. I mean, this kid, it goes beyond the field. I mean, he's a guy that really leads inside the football building. He's a guy that the team has a ton of confidence in. And the Gators finished last year playing as well as anybody. I mean, that win over Tulane, and people might scoff, but Tulane was a pretty salty football team, and Florida looked really good. And, of course, that win over Ole Miss. Florida was beating Georgia when Lagway was in the game. I mean, I don't know that they necessarily would have hung on and won, but they were giving the Dogs all they wanted with DJ Lagway as a first-year starter. Now he comes back with momentum. So that's my top 4: Texas, LSU, Georgia, Florida. My second 4: South Carolina, Oklahoma, Alabama, Tennessee. I dropped down into Texas, A&M, Missouri, Ole Miss, and Auburn. And then bottom of the bucket, the Maroon Bulldogs, the Commodores, the Wildcats, and old buddy Sam. Hope he finds a way, but it's like you said, with so few returning starters, going to be hard for the Hogs.
So just to reiterate, my top: UGA, Texas, LSU, Tennessee. Next, Alabama, Florida, South Carolina, Ole Miss. Then I've got Missouri, Oklahoma, Auburn, and Texas A&M. And then at the very bottom, Mississippi State, Arkansas, Kentucky, and Vanderbilt. Now, just looking at this from a more broad perspective, so the SEC is supposed to be the best conference in college football, and traditionally it has been. But it hasn't been able to win a national championship in 2 years. Does an SEC team win the national championship this year?
Man, that's tough, Kaylee. It's really hard to know because apparently you can finish in 4th place in the Big Ten and heat it up in the tournament. I mean, that's what Ohio State did. They lost 2 of their 3 biggest games last year at Oregon and at home against Michigan. And, somehow they end up with a number 8 seed, which to me was an outcry. I don't think it's quite as big as North Carolina getting in the NCAA basketball tournament, but it's definitely something I would question. I don't think they deserved a home game. I don't know if it would have made a difference. I don't know if that game was played in Neyland Stadium, that the results any different, but still, it's a little less wear and tear. It's a little less travel. A lot depends on this committee, and will they value schedule strength? How will the teams be seeded? I think we've got one more year where you're going to see the top 4 seeds be conference champions. They're not necessarily the best teams, but this is the system they came up with for the final 2 years of the contract. So it kind of throws a monkey wrench into things and makes it a little bit harder to diagnose. You mentioned what happened to Georgia, and gosh, Georgia fans, I know it was a disappointing end, but I really hope that doesn't overshadow how well Kirby coached and the way these guys played to win an SEC championship, the adversity, the resiliency, the hunger. New Orleans was a complete, blank show down there. I mean, obviously there was, the tragedy of the terrorist attack, and I think it distracted all of us. But beyond that, just the tragedy in Kirby's family, with what was happening with his father, who ultimately passed away. I just can't, and I know Kirby would never make this excuse, but I just didn't feel like it was the same Kirby. He wasn't at the walkthrough the day before. I mean, it disrupts things just enough. And you say, but what about the game? And you go, yeah, even more outlier action, right? I mean, a fumble inside the 10 when, Anthony Evans, out of the program, now just completely whiffs on a block and ETN gets blown up inside the 10. I mean, that's going to be a touchdown. Instead, it's not. You don't have that 7-0 lead. And, Gunner, the strip sack there, Notre Dame never drove inside the 25-yard line, Kaylee. They never drove inside the 25. They wouldn't have scored a touchdown if not for the strip sack at the 13, one play later, touchdown, boom. And then talking with the Notre Dame players there at the Combine, you were there with me, and, they point to the kickoff return to open the second half because we're all thinking the same thing. It's 13-3, and, Georgia's been here before, but boom, 7 points. And now it's a whole different game, right? It's a whole different game. And that's the first touchdown return in, 6 years against Georgia. And Cash Jones is there, and he slows him down, but for some reason, the pursuit's just not there. And the winning edge for Georgia has been special teams, but suddenly it's not. And it just made the deficit too much for Gunner in his first start with that receiving core, with the offensive line somewhat neutralized by the Notre Dame front seven. Gunner just wasn't good enough to put the team on his shoulders. And that's why when I look to this year, I ask myself, look, I know Gunner Stockton knows the playbook. I know that he's a film rat. I know he's the hardest working quarterback. I know he's a high school record holder. I know everybody wants him to marry their daughter. I mean, this kid he's an incredible young man. But at the end of the day, does he have the talent to put the team on his shoulders in a championship game situation, A, or B? If he doesn't, does he have the supporting cast? I mean, this is not the Stetson Bennett supporting cast. I mean, there's Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey aren't coming out of that tunnel, and neither is James Cook or Kenny McIntosh for that matter. And I don't see any first-round offensive line picks at the time. It's not the same offensive firepower. It's not about play calling for Mike Bobo. Does he have the players to win those one-on-ones? Does he have the receiver that's going to go 50, 60 yards after the catch? And that remains to be seen. So, that's kind of where I come at it from as far as the Dogs. And yet still, I really have a lot of respect for what Gunner did in the SEC championship game in Georgia last year. I don't want that to be overlooked because of this playoff. So when we look forward and say who's going to win the playoff, it's hard to do without knowing the seeding, without knowing how the committee's going to work. It's just maddening that every year it changes. Kirby said that in 2018. He was right. You never know what they're going to put an emphasis on. You never know the health of your team. I mean, who's to say if Carson Beck stays healthy? Maybe Georgia beats Notre Dame with a healthy Carson Beck. Maybe they come from behind and beat Texas. I don't know. I mean, it might be harder to predict than what kind of car he's got in the parking lot or who he's dating right now. But the fact of the matter is, Carson had this high ceiling. And when he was on, I mean, let's not forget the Tennessee game. Let's not forget how awesome Carson was at the end of the Tech game. I mean, this is a guy with some NFL talent. When he was dialed in, it was real tough to beat the Dogs. So we got to know who the Georgia quarterback is. I think Georgia is one of those teams, if they make the playoff, they're immediately a championship contender because they have Kirby Smart and this coaching staff with this continuity, which means so much. When you've got so many players coming and going, that continuity is even bigger than ever before because all the coaches are on the same page, and it makes it that much easier to teach this incoming class of freshmen that'll have to contribute and the transfers. So I need to see how the Georgia quarterback situation plays out before I pick a championship winner. I need to see what this committee does, and we don't know that till 9th or 10th week of the season, what they're going to rank these teams based on. And I need to see the college landscape. I want to see how Ohio State reloads. I'm with you. I want to see what Arch Manning does. Is he the greatest thing since sliced bread? He looked awful good in his appearances, but they did lose some talent. So Texas is a factor. The committee's a factor. How the seedings play out, and certainly the health of the teams. But I'd put Georgia in that championship mix, whether they play in the SEC championship game or not.
Yeah, I think you make a lot of interesting points. And the good thing is, even though we don't have all the answers right now, we're slowly but surely going to start getting them as spring practice starts to commence. So that'll wrap up our football talk. One last thing before we cut out. You're going to hop on a flight tomorrow. You are going to go watch the dogs dance. Have you ever been to Wichita, Kansas?
Not on purpose. I don't think I have. I may have, driven through it at one point in life, and it certainly wasn't memorable. Quite the aviation history for Wichita, I'm told. There's a museum out there. And apparently they've got a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Somebody said that he helped Mike Bobo design the Georgia offense. Sorry, I couldn't help that. I'm a Mike Bobo proponent too. It was just too easy. But they've got this Tyrannosaurus Rex exhibit out there. I'm really reaching for interesting things in Wichita, Kaylee. The food's good. They have a lot of good Mexican restaurants, I'm told, and Lebanese restaurants. So, but other than that, Georgia basketball in the tournament for the first time in 10 years. That's what I'm there for. I'm excited to see these dogs take on Gonzaga. Mark Few is a guy that I've just got a ton of respect for. I had a chance to watch him run a practice. I was out at the Maui Invitationals, I want to say about 15 years ago. And I got to watch a Kansas practice and a Gonzaga practice because the practices were open out there, back to back. And Bill Self is out there, and I mean, he's just lighting them up. I mean, this practice, you'd have to bleep out every other. I mean, he's just on these guys, and you're like, wow, I never saw that side of Bill Self and the Jayhawks. And he's just grinding them, and just, every bad word in the book's coming out of his mouth, and just on top of these guys. And then Few comes out there and he's like your science teacher. Everything's logical and rational, and all the pieces are moving, and it's just so organized. It's such a fluid and well-coached basketball program. And you talk to him afterward, and he's just such a prince of a guy. And who wins the nice guy contest between Mike White and Mark? And both of these guys ought to be, helping the Girl Scout cookies or something. I mean, they're just such good coaches, and they're just such high character, friendly, professional guys. I can't wait to see it, because it's going to be a great mix of teams, of talent. The Zags lead the nation in points per game in the paint. The Dogs are so good. Asa Newell, he's got millions to make out there if he can shut down this 6'10 Zags redshirt sophomore center. Zags with a fantastic point guard. Can Silas Demery Jr. bow up? This guy's 6'4". Looks like he'd be a tailback if he was 3 inches shorter. So athletic and physical. Blue Kane, the way he can light it up like a microwave. Dakota LaFleur comes off the bench. So many components to this game, Kaylee. Can't wait till 4:35 p.m. on Thursday. And TBS, appropriately enough.
I thought that as well, Mike. Well, listen, we wish you safe travels. I once heard someone say that when it comes to Kansas, there's no place like home. So I hope you have the best time. Excited that you get to go watch the dogs out there. And guys, don't forget, Georgia, Gonzaga, Thursday, TPS, 4:35 p.m. This has been On the Beat. I'm Kaylee Mansell with Mike Griffith. And make sure to tune in to DawgNation.com for all things basketball all week long.